My name is Evelyn Reid. I'm 31, and last Thanksgiving, my sister told me I wasn't part of the family anymore. 2 hours later, the FBI showed up at her house, looking for me. Only they didn't call me Evelyn. They called me Agent Reid. But before we get to that part, let me rewind. I grew up in the small town of Fairfield, Connecticut. Picture perfect on the surface. White picket fences, town fairs every summer, and neighbors who knew which cereal you ate for breakfast. My parents, Henry and Lorna Reid, raised us in a traditional two-story house with navy shutters and a wraparound porch. My sister Claire was 4 years older, and from the moment I could walk, I was always chasing her shadow. She was the golden child, valedictorian, prom queen, Ivy League bound. I was the quiet one, the one who liked puzzles and books with redacted pages. Literally. My fascination with secrecy started young. While other kids played house or dress up, I practiced memorizing license plates, testing my peripheral vision, and listening at doors without getting caught. I used to sneak into Dad's study just to read his old military files, half of which were classified beyond my understanding. He used to be Army intelligence before settling into small-town civilian life, though he rarely talked about it. I got my love of structure from him. My mother, on the other hand, loved order only when it served appearances. She spent more time curating our Christmas card photo than learning what I wanted for my birthday. Claire, of course, thrived in all that. She was exactly who my mother had always dreamed of raising. Blonde, poised, charismatic in the way that made strangers trust her immediately. She could talk her way into a sold-out gala or a last-minute scholarship. Meanwhile, I became the designated errand girl, forgotten but useful. I didn't resent it at first. I figured we each had our role. But over time, it became clear that in our family, value wasn't measured by loyalty or sacrifice. It was measured by spotlight. While Claire went off to study public relations at Georgetown, I joined the FBI straight out of college. Not that anyone in my family knew. To them, I worked for a private compliance firm in D.C. That's what I told them, and that's what the agency advised me to stick with. It made it easier to operate without baggage. My assignments kept me traveling, mostly working in economic crimes, money laundering, fraud, white-collar corruption. Glamorous in theory, mostly a paper trail in practice. But 2 years ago, things shifted. I was pulled into a classified task force investigating shell companies connected to organized crime in the Northeast Corridor. The deeper we got, the more I realized that the network we were unraveling didn't just intersect with Wall Street. It bled into small towns, into family-run businesses, into lives that looked completely ordinary. Like mine. My visits home were infrequent. Thanksgiving was the one non-negotiable event. Mom would spend days prepping appetizers no one ate, and Claire would float around in whatever expensive designer label she was currently promoting on Instagram. She had become a lifestyle influencer. 500,000 followers, paid partnerships with organic skincare brands, and a fiancé named Derek who seemed like a walking business card. Clean-cut, soulless, and always one comment away from using the word synergy. Last year, Thanksgiving fell during a particularly tense time. I had been working a deep dive case out of Boston for almost 6 months, following a laundering pipeline that, oddly enough, seemed to run through several small, family-owned construction companies. One of them, Danvers Contracting, had flagged our attention when over $4 million moved through its accounts in a 90-day window. What made it more interesting? Claire had just tagged them in a sponsored post. I didn't tell anyone. I simply added it to the board. By the time I arrived at the family home for Thanksgiving, I already had suspicions. Claire greeted me at the door with her usual bright smile and air kisses that didn't land. "Look at you," she said, eyeing my black slacks and wool coat. "Still dressing like a government intern, huh?" I smiled. "Still mistaking luxury for personality?" She laughed like I was joking. Inside, everything looked familiar and false. Cranberry-scented candles, coordinated place settings, and a large gold-lettered "Give Thanks" sign above the fireplace. Derek was carving the turkey like he was auditioning for a cooking show, and our parents were already deep into their second bottle of wine. I kept my coat on longer than I needed to. The folder in my bag, unmarked, locked with a biometric clasp, rested against my back like armor. I had no intention of opening it that night, but I brought it anyway. Dinner started like it always did. Forced prayers, Mom fishing for compliments, Dad sneaking looks at the game on his tablet. But midway through dessert, Claire stood up and tapped her wine glass. "I have an announcement," she said, voice sparkling with self-importance. "Derek and I have decided to take the next step." A chorus of "You're getting married" rang out from the older relatives. Claire laughed. "No, that's already happening in June. I mean the other next step. We're going into business together. We've started a consulting group focused on regional development and branding strategy. It's called Reid Works." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "And we're so thrilled to announce," she continued, "that Danvers Contracting is officially our first major client." I set my fork down. The table erupted in congratulations. My mother looked like she'd just been told she'd won a seat on the town council. "Oh, Claire," she beamed, "your grandfather would have been so proud. You're keeping the Reid name on something important." Claire smiled. "Well, some of us know how to make the name mean something." The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. I met her gaze across the table. She didn't blink. "And speaking of family," she added with a dramatic pause, "we've had a lot of discussions lately about how to protect our brand moving forward. And sometimes that means setting boundaries." "Claire," Mom said softly, warning in her voice. But Claire pressed on. "Evelyn, this might be hard to hear, but we've all agreed that your distant lifestyle and secretive work doesn't reflect well on our public image. We've decided," she looked around the table like she was rallying votes, "that until you're ready to be more transparent with your life and your choices, we'd prefer you not attend family events." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Dad nodded, like it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Mom dabbed at her eyes but said nothing. Derek sipped his wine, not looking at me. I leaned back in my chair. Calm. I had faced down cartel lieutenants with more tact than this dinner table. "You're voting me out of the family," I said, more a statement than a question. "It's not personal," Claire replied, utterly without irony. Just then, right on cue, the doorbell rang. Everyone turned. Derek stood confused. Did someone order something? The doorbell rang again, this time followed by 3 sharp knocks. I stood. "No one move," I said, walking calmly toward the front hallway. Claire frowned. "Evelyn, what are you?" I opened the door. 2 agents stood on the porch, both in dark coats, badges already out. The taller one nodded. "Evening. We're looking for Agent Reid." I didn't turn around. I simply pulled my badge from my pocket and flipped it open. "Agent Evelyn Reid," I said clearly. "Serial 3-7-2-9B. "You're early." Claire's gasp behind me was audible. The taller agent glanced past me. "Apologies for the timing. We need to debrief you immediately. There's been movement on the Danvers case." I stepped onto the porch and turned back to face the family, who now stared at me as if I had grown a second head. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said. The door closed behind me with a solid finality, muffling the stunned silence left in the dining room. I followed Agents Chun and Maddox down the walkway toward their unmarked vehicle, the air sharp with late November cold. As soon as we were out of view from the house, Maddox passed me a tablet through the rear window. "Confirmation just came in," he said. "You were right about the shell corp. Claire's firm, Reid Works, is being used to clean construction cash. Fronts through Danvers Contracting, routed into consulting fees and PR services." I scrolled through the files, scanning wire transfers and contract terms with growing affirmation. Claire hadn't just stumbled into a bad partnership, she was neck-deep in it. Maybe not knowingly at first, but the emails we had intercepted suggested she'd stopped asking questions as soon as the money started pouring in. "We've got probable cause for a search warrant," Agent Chin added. "We'll execute it in 48. If we go in now, it could spook the Danvers side of the network. We need them unaware." "So, what do you need from me tonight?" I asked, already shifting back into agent mode. Maddox gave a half-smile. "You just detonated a social grenade at that dinner table. That's going to work in our favor. She won't suspect you're still involved. She thinks I got kicked out of the family." Exactly. What better cover is there? I nodded. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had quietly pushed me out was now unknowingly part of a criminal investigation I'd been building for months. After a brief strategy meeting at the safe house we were using for surveillance, I returned to my hotel just past midnight. I didn't go home. Home didn't feel like it had a location anymore. The hotel room was quiet and sterile. I dropped my bag on the chair and peeled off my coat. For a long moment, I stared at myself in the mirror over the desk. I didn't look like someone who'd just been disowned over pumpkin pie and pecan tarts. But I also didn't look like someone who had just gained the upper hand in a federal case involving racketeering either. Mostly, I looked tired. My phone buzzed on the table. I already knew who it was before I picked it up.
Claire.
Text message. Claire. What the hell was that? The FBI? You're an agent? Claire. You've been spying on me? Claire. I swear to God, Evelyn, if you set me up. I muted the notifications. Let her stew. The next morning, I did what I hadn't done in months. I drove back to the old neighborhood, parked in front of the coffee shop across from our high school, and ordered the same cappuccino I used to drink after cross-country practice. No one recognized me. That was fine. I wasn't there for nostalgia. I needed to think. If I was being honest, part of me had always assumed Claire would find her way into something ethically gray. She had a way of justifying things to herself. Ends over means, ambition over caution. What I didn't expect was that her vanity would be the hook. Danvers had used her like a trophy, an influencer with a public image to sanitize their criminal pipeline. The fact that she'd looped in our family name made it personal. When I finally turned my phone back on that afternoon, there were 12 voicemails. 6 from Claire, 1 from Mom, 1 from Derek, of all people, 3 unknown numbers, and 1 from a blocked line. I listened to that one first. Agent Reid, this is Deputy Director Holcomb. Just reviewed the preliminary files.
Good work.
We'll move Sunday morning, 6 a.m. briefing, 7 o'clock execution. You'll coordinate local field agents on site. Call me back with any objections. None given. I called him back, confirmed, then sat for a while in silence, watching as holiday shoppers bustled past the window. The world kept turning, even as mine had quietly fractured and reformed under different laws of gravity. Sunday came fast. I was on site by 5:30, stationed a block down from Reid Works' rented office suite. The lights were on, early risers, or someone trying to scrub files before business hours. Didn't matter. We had mirrored their systems for weeks. Nothing they deleted now would save them. At 7:02, the warrants were executed. 5 agents stormed Danvers' satellite office, while another team swept through Claire's workspace. I stayed in the van, monitoring feed from body cams and overseeing data extraction. By 7:35, Claire was in custody, detained, not arrested.
Yet.
We needed statements. Context. I watched through the screen as she sat in the conference room, arms crossed, eyes hollow. She's asking for you, Agent Chin said. Wants to know why you did it. I didn't do anything to her, I said, standing. I did something for the victims. Claire didn't look up when I entered the room. She stared straight ahead, her usual polish gone, replaced by a brittle edge. So this is what you've been doing, she said flatly. I sat across from her, resting my file on the table. This is who I've always been. You let me humiliate you. You did that all on your own. Her jaw flexed. We followed the money, I said. You're smart, Claire. You had to know something was off. I thought they were legitimate contracts. Branding packages.
Consulting.
I signed papers Derek brought. I didn't, she caught herself. I didn't ask enough questions. No, I agreed. You didn't. Tears welled, but she blinked them away fast. What happens now? You cooperate. You tell the truth. You give us what we need on Danvers and we consider reduced charges. But Claire, this won't go away because you're sorry. The law doesn't work like that. You're going to let them arrest me? No, I said, standing. You did that. The press release went out Monday. Federal Task Force uncovers regional laundering network. Names were redacted, but local news picked up the story. Fairfield buzzed with speculation. Claire deleted all her social media within 24 hours. Derek took a leave from his boutique investment firm. My parents didn't call. I didn't expect them to. Tuesday morning, Agent Holcomb called again. You did good, Reid. You held your line. Thanks, I said, though it felt hollow. There was a moment of silence before he added, We're considering you for a promotion. I know your name's going to come out eventually. You prepared for that. I've been invisible for most of my life, I said. Maybe it's time I wasn't. I didn't go back to the family house for Christmas. There was no invitation and I didn't reach out. For the first time in years, I spent the holidays in DC, alone but not lonely. I had work. I had clarity. I had silence that didn't feel like punishment. Claire accepted a deal in late January. She gave the Bureau everything: emails, communications, internal memos, even back-channel messages between Danvers executives and her so-called PR strategist who, in reality, handled offshore accounts. In exchange, she got house arrest and 10 years probation, narrowly avoiding jail time. The judge said her cooperation and clean record were mitigating factors. I knew better. It was her privilege, her proximity to influence, and yes, the Reid name still carrying just enough weight to bend the system her way. The irony wasn't lost on me. The sister who had disowned me for being bad optics now wore an ankle monitor under a silk lounge set. When the court transcript hit public record, our mother called me for the first time in months. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't need to say anything, I replied. I didn't know, Evelyn. I didn't know what she was doing. I stayed quiet. After a pause, she added, You always said things without needing to be seen. Maybe that's the difference. I hung up before she could make it sound like a compliment. By early spring, I was back on rotation in DC, working a new wire fraud case involving a cybersecurity firm with Department of Defense contracts. It was cleaner. No family ties. No emotional barbs dressed as dinner conversations. I'd moved into a new apartment, sleek, sterile, efficient. The kind of place that didn't require much explanation. On my wall hung only one picture: my father in uniform, shaking hands with his commanding officer, and me, 6 years old, peeking out from behind his leg. I hadn't spoken to my father since Thanksgiving. One night in March, I came home to find a letter in my mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My father's. Inside, on a single sheet of plain paper, were the words, You were always the one watching. I'm sorry it took me so long to see. That was it. I didn't reply. I didn't know how to begin writing a response to that much absence. Claire resurfaced on LinkedIn in April. Her profile had been scrubbed down to essentials: Georgetown alumna, communications consultant, currently on sabbatical. No mention of Reid works. No photos. No affiliations. She was being erased, slowly and precisely, as if her narrative could be rewritten with just the right tone of beige. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't watching her anymore. By then, I had accepted Holcomb's offer. I was officially reassigned to lead a multi-state task force investigating fraud and digital laundering. My name was no longer buried beneath layers of alias and clearance levels. Evelyn Reid had a title now: Special Agent in Charge. The job came with a different kind of scrutiny, but I welcomed it. Let them see. I had spent enough time in the shadows. In May, I got a message through bureau channels that surprised me. Subject line: Request for outreach speaker, Fairfield High School Career Week. Sender: Ms. Rena Watts, Guidance Office. Hi, Agent Reid. I know this might be unusual, but we've been following your career from afar. Your recent success on the task force is something our students would benefit from hearing about. Would you consider speaking at our career day next month? It felt surreal. The same school where I had been the quiet girl in the third row was now inviting me back as a guest of honor. I replied yes. The auditorium hadn't changed much. Still smelled faintly of varnish and dust. The seniors looked younger than I remembered being at 17, wide-eyed, unsure, waiting for someone to hand them a map. I stood at the podium, crisp blazer buttoned, badge clipped to my belt. My name echoed off the walls as Ms. Watts introduced me, her voice thick with pride. When I began to speak, I didn't talk about Claire. I didn't mention Danvers or money laundering or betrayal. I told them about choices, about the power of noticing things others ignored, about staying steady when everyone else chased the spotlight, about how you could build a life from the quiet corners of your strengths. After the session, a girl in a navy sweatshirt approached me. "I didn't think FBI agents were real," she said. "You don't look like the ones on TV." I smiled. "We're not. I want to do what you do. Then start watching everything," I told her. "Not the loud stuff. The small things." She nodded, and for the first time in months, I felt something that resembled peace. June brought a shift I didn't expect. I was midway through a report when I got a text from Derek. Yes, Derek. The human spreadsheet. Claire's ex-fiancé. "Do you have 5 minutes to talk?" I stared at the message for 10, then replied.
5.
No more. We met at a coffee shop halfway between his new condo and the federal building. He looked different, looser, as though the polished veneer had finally cracked and let something human out. "I owe you an apology," he began. I raised an eyebrow. "For which part?" "All of it. But mostly for letting Claire do what she did and pretending it wasn't happening. You were complicit." "I know. That's why I walked away. I left the firm. Started over. I even paid back the money that came through Reid Works. Every cent. I studied him. He wasn't performing. Not anymore." "Why now?" I asked. "Because I wanted to say thank you for being the only one who did the right thing." I nodded once.
Good.
"Now, do it again. For someone else." He smiled. "You sound like a real agent." I stood. "That's because I am." By July, the Fairfield scandal was yesterday's news. New investigations took precedence. New files landed on my desk. But something had shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the shadowed sister, the background presence. I had stepped forward and stayed. I still hadn't gone back to Thanksgiving. But this year I might. Because this time, I wouldn't go as someone asking for a seat at the table. I'd go as someone who brought her own. Thanksgiving came around again, as it always does, with its predictable urgency, grocery lists, travel plans, and polite texts asking what pie everyone's bringing. But this year was different. This year, I was the one hosting. The idea started small, a conversation over coffee with Marlene from the bureau, then a group message with 3 other agents who didn't have plans, then Michael, my neighbor from down the hall, offered to bring his grandmother's cornbread stuffing. By the end of the week, I had 12 guests confirmed. Some were colleagues, some were new friends, all of them chosen. I cooked most of the food myself: roasted turkey, garlic mashed potatoes, roasted Brussels sprouts with balsamic glaze, even a pecan pie from scratch. It felt strange and sacred, preparing a holiday meal that wasn't steeped in obligation or competition. At 3 p.m., my apartment filled with the sound of laughter, glasses clinking, and chairs scraping back from the table. Someone brought board games. Someone else opened the windows when the oven made it too warm. No one judged anyone's life choices or issued ultimatums between dessert and coffee. At one point, as I refilled drinks, I looked around and thought, this is what family feels like when it isn't weaponized. Around 6:30, after the guests had migrated to the living room with full stomachs and loosened belts, I stepped out onto my small balcony, letting the cool air press against my skin. I sipped my wine and thought about the year that had passed. It had started with betrayal and ended in rebuilding. Claire was still under probation. She'd moved to a quiet suburb an hour outside the city, living with a roommate and working at a small local nonprofit. According to her PO, she was attending counseling and making regular restitution payments. We'd spoken twice, brief, cautious exchanges where we both pretended not to remember how things had burned down. She was no longer the villain in my story. But she wasn't the hero either. I had stopped needing her to be either. My parents were more complicated. My mother now called once a week, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to ask real questions. That was new. And strange. She still didn't fully understand what I did, but she was trying. Dad and I had lunch once in August, at a diner halfway between our cities. We talked about neutral things, sports, taxes, the weather. But before we left, he reached into his coat and handed me a folder. "What's this?" I asked. "My retirement paperwork," he said. "I want you to review it." "Why?" "Because I trust you with the numbers. And because I trust you now, period." That sentence meant more than every forced "I'm proud of you" he'd ever uttered over the phone. In late November, just days before the holiday, I was called into Director Holcomb's office. The air was different in that room, thicker, more deliberate. "Have a seat, Agent Reid," he said. I did. He tapped a file folder on his desk. "You've been recommended for a promotion. Assistant Deputy Director. Joint Intelligence Division." My breath caught. I wasn't expecting that. "You should have," he said. "Your leadership on the Danvers case, your command presence, your discretion, it hasn't gone unnoticed." I blinked, trying to play it cool. "And the family fallout? That didn't look messy?" Holcomb cracked a rare smile. "Messy? Reid, the way you handled that circus could be a case study in professionalism. You didn't burn the house down. You filed the paperwork while someone else lit the match. That's the kind of stability we need upstairs." I signed the paperwork the next day. Thanksgiving night, just as I was loading the dishwasher, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone else. When I opened it, Claire stood there, hair tucked into a beanie, a small pie box in her hands. "Hey," she said. I didn't move. "Hey." She held out the box. "Pumpkin. I remembered it was your favorite." "Not since I was 12, I said. But I took the box anyway. She shifted on her feet. "I heard you hosted this year." "I did." "That's good." There was a long pause. "You want to come in?" I asked. "I don't want to impose." "Claire," I said evenly, "you already did that last Thanksgiving. So this one, if you're here to make peace, you can at least do it over pie." She exhaled, and for the first time, she looked small. Not performative, not angry. Just a person who had finally seen the cost of her own choices. I led her into the kitchen and made us tea while the last of the guests filtered out. We sat at my small table, the same one I'd assembled myself from a flat pack 2 years ago, and shared a slice of her pie. "I've been thinking about last year a lot," she said. "So have I." I was awful. I didn't disagree. She picked at the crust. "I used to think that being seen was the most important thing. That attention equaled love. You were always invisible, and I thought that meant you didn't matter. But you were the one actually doing things." "I know. I'm sorry," she whispered. "Claire," I said, setting down my fork. "For a long time, I thought forgiveness meant inviting someone back into your life exactly the way they were before. But I've learned that's not it." "Then what is it?" "It's deciding their actions don't get to define you anymore. Forgiveness isn't about making them comfortable. It's about letting yourself breathe." She nodded, eyes glossy. We sat in silence, sipping tea, and it wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't war either. Just two sisters who had both lost and found themselves. By the time she left, the apartment was quiet again. I stood at the sink, staring out the window at the city lights blinking in the distance.
My phone buzzed beside me.
A message from Holcomb. "Welcome to the big leagues, Agent Reid. You're not invisible anymore." I smiled and texted back. Was never trying to be. Just busy doing the work. This time, no one could erase it.